I started noticing it in the most imperceptible way, like it was just a small detail lost somewhere in the middle of daily routine. A tiny noise, easy to dismiss. A name that slipped away at the wrong moment. A simple task I had to mentally repeat several times before completing it. That strange feeling of being physically present, but not fully lucid. Like there was a thin layer of fog between you and the world. At first, I ignored it. After all, everyone forgets things, right? Modern life is hectic, stress is high, the list of responsibilities never ends. It makes sense that the mind stumbles every now and then. I convinced myself of that for a long time. But then these moments started repeating themselves, more frequently, more noticeably, harder to hide, and the worst part wasn't the forgetting itself. It was realizing that other people were noticing. That awkward silence after someone repeats what they just said, and you can tell by their expression that it had already been said before. The uncomfortable smile when you try to remember something obvious in the middle of a conversation. The feeling that the words are there, somewhere in your memory, but you simply can't reach them. And there's something even harder to admit. The silent insecurity that starts growing inside you. That inner voice that whispers, is this getting worse? Is there an explanation for this? Is there a point of no return? That insecurity is what truly erodes you. Not just the forgetting itself, but the fear of what it represents. That was the point where I decided to stop treating this as something normal, because the more I observed, the more I realized these signs weren't random. They followed a pattern. A pattern that millions of people live every single day without realizing there's something far deeper happening inside the brain. And that's when I came across something that completely changed the way I see all of this. To understand what was happening, I first needed to understand how the brain functions under normal conditions. And the answer was more fascinating and more unsettling than I expected. The human brain is the most complex organ in existence. It processes billions of pieces of information per second, regulates every system in the body, stores decades of memories, and performs calculations that no supercomputer can replicate with the same efficiency. All of this in an organ that weighs approximately 3 pounds, but that complexity comes at a cost. The brain consumes roughly 20% of the body's total energy, even though it represents less than 2% of body weight. That intense metabolism generates waste, cellular byproducts that need to be constantly eliminated so the system can continue functioning properly. And here's the point. Nobody explains to you in simple terms. When that cleaning process fails, even partially, the consequences don't appear suddenly. They appear gradually, subtly, the same way droplets of water form a puddle, and a puddle forms a flood. Research shows that over time, the brain can begin accumulating toxic substances, metabolic residues that should be naturally eliminated, but end up depositing themselves due to a combination of factors tied to modern lifestyle. Among these residues, structures known as beta-amyloid plaques have been extensively studied for their association with cognitive decline. They form when fragments of a protein called amyloid beta aggregate between nerve cells, interfering with communication between neurons and compromising functions like memory, attention, and reasoning. But here's the critical point. Most people don't know. This doesn't happen overnight. It's a silent process, progressive, and largely fueled by everyday habits that seem completely harmless. Think about your routine over the last few years. Nights of poor sleep, whether from stress, screen time before bed, anxiety, or simply the restlessness of adult life. Excessive digital stimulation that keeps the brain in a constant state of alertness, with no real windows for recovery. An increasingly inflammatory diet, loaded with refined sugar, processed vegetable oils, white flour, and chemical additives. Growing sedentariness, especially in jobs that demand hours sitting in front of screens. Each of these factors, in isolation, seems small, but combined over months and years, they create the perfect conditions for the brain's cleaning system to start breaking down. That system has a name, the glymphatic system, and understanding it completely changed the way I think about brain health. The glymphatic system is a network of microscopic channels surrounding the brain's blood vessels that acts as a drainage system. Its function is to circulate cerebrospinal fluid through brain tissue, collecting metabolic waste and transporting it out of the body. And here's the part that stunned researchers when it was first discovered. This system is almost completely inactive during the day, operates predominantly at night. During deep sleep, brain cells called glial cells literally shrink, increasing the space between them and allowing cerebrospinal fluid to flow far more freely. It's like opening the floodgates of an irrigation canal. Studies published by the University of Rochester, led by researcher Mika Nettergaard, were pioneers in demonstrating this process. The results showed that glymphatic flow during sleep can be up to 10 times greater than during waking hours, and that it is responsible for eliminating a significant amount of the toxic proteins accumulated throughout the day. 10 times greater. Let that sink in. What does that mean in practice? It means that every night of poor sleep isn't just a tiring night. It's a night when the brain couldn't complete its cleaning cycle, when the previous day's residues remained accumulated, when the system operated at a fraction of its capacity, and when that repeats over weeks, months, years, the mind feels it. Clarity diminishes, focus fluctuates, memory fails at the most unexpected moments. That mental fog that once seemed like a minor detail starts to feel like a permanent presence. But understanding this changed everything for me, because for the first time I realized it wasn't a lack of ability. It was an inevitable aging. It wasn't something that just happens to everyone. It was overload. My brain wasn't getting worse, it was saturated, operating with accumulated waste, without the necessary conditions to clean, regenerate, and recover itself. And when you understand the cause, you start seeing the path forward. Before I continue, though, I need to ask you something directly. Have you ever found yourself reading a paragraph several times without being able to absorb what it says? Have you ever walked into a room and stood there for a few seconds with no memory of why you went in? Have you ever lost the thread of your reasoning in the middle of an important conversation, or struggled to find a simple word that was right on the tip of your tongue? If the answer is yes to any of those situations, it's no coincidence that you're watching this video right now. And what I'm going to tell you next could be the turning point you've been needing, because we've left a practical guide in the first link in the description, straightforward, evidence-based for anyone who wants to understand this process more deeply and start taking action. Click and access it now. Getting back to the path I started walking. After understanding the role of the glymphatic system and the impact of sleep on the brain, I began investigating the other pillars that directly influence cognitive health. And what I found was, at the same time, surprising and comforting. Surprising because most of these pillars are within reach of any person. Comforting because none of them require radical or impossible changes. The first pillar is sleep, and not just in quantity, but in quality. The difference between sleeping 8 hours superficially and sleeping 6 hours with full, deep cycles can be enormous for the brain. What matters isn't just time in bed, but the ability to enter and remain in the deepest stages of sleep, especially slow-wave sleep, where glymphatic activity is most intense. Simple habits like reducing exposure to blue light in the 2 hours before bed, maintaining consistent sleep schedules, and avoiding heavy meals in the evening hours can make a real difference in the quality of those cycles. The second pillar is anti-inflammatory nutrition. The brain is highly vulnerable to chronic inflammation, and the modern Western diet, rich in refined sugar, processed vegetable oils, white flour, and chemical additives, is essentially a recipe for systemic inflammation. On the other hand, compounds found in foods like fatty fish, rich in omega-3, extra virgin olive oil, leafy greens, berries, turmeric, and walnuts have demonstrated, in clinical studies, the ability to reduce inflammatory markers in the body and potentially protect neuronal function. This isn't trendy dieting, it's applied biochemistry. The third pillar is physical movement. When we exercise, especially in moderate aerobic activity, the body releases a protein called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. This protein acts like a fertilizer for neurons, stimulating the creation of new connections, strengthening existing ones, and protecting against degeneration. Studies show that adults who exercise regularly have, on average, larger hippocampal volumes, the brain region directly associated with memory and learning. This isn't theoretical, it's observable in MRI imaging. The fourth pillar is chronic stress management. Cortisol, the stress hormone at elevated levels over prolonged periods, is toxic to the brain, especially to the hippocampus, which has a high concentration of cortisol receptors. Chronic exposure to this hormone is associated with reduced hippocampal volume and impaired long-term memory. Practices like meditation, conscious breathing, genuine moments of mental silence, and even simple walks in nature have demonstrated the ability to reduce cortisol levels and protect brain integrity. And the fifth pillar, perhaps the most underestimated, is active cognitive stimulation. The brain responds to challenge. When you learn something new, solve a complex problem, play an instrument, study a language, or engage in any activity that demands real attention and mental effort, you are literally creating new neural connections. This has a name: neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is perhaps the most revolutionary discovery in modern neuroscience. For decades, it was believed that the adult brain was essentially fixed, that neurons developed up to a certain age and then simply declined, that the brain was like a machine that inevitably wore down with time. That view has been completely overturned. Today we know that the adult brain is highly plastic, that it can create new synaptic connections in response to learning, that it can reorganize neural routes to compensate for damage in specific areas, that it can, literally, grow in regions associated with functions being exercised consistently. The London taxi driver who memorizes thousands of streets demonstrably has a more developed hippocampus than average. The musician who practices regularly has greater cortical thickness in motor and auditory regions. The long-term meditator shows greater gray matter volume in areas linked to attention and emotional regulation. The brain responds to the demands you place on it, and that opens up a completely different perspective. This isn't about resignation in the face of aging. It's about understanding that the brain is a living, dynamic, responsive organ, and that the choices you make every day are constantly shaping its structure and its function, for better or for worse. But I know that for someone living this right now, it might feel distant. It might sound like pretty theory that works in studies but doesn't apply to your reality, with work, family, obligations, constant pressure, and very little time for anything. And I understand that, because forgetting something important isn't just inconvenient. Having to ask someone to repeat what they just said isn't just embarrassing. Feeling like your mind locks up in the middle of an important situation affects something far deeper: the way you see yourself, the confidence you have in your own mind. And when that starts happening frequently, the internal narrative shifts. You begin avoiding situations where memory might let you down. You start writing down things you used to simply remember. You begin compensating, concealing, working around a limitation that is quietly growing, that is real. And that's exactly why this subject matters. It's not cognitive vanity. It's quality of life. It's mental independence. It's the capacity to be truly present in conversations, in decisions, in the moments that matter most. And the right path exists. It isn't magic. It doesn't happen overnight. But it is real. It is structured. It is evidence-based, and perhaps most importantly, it is within reach of anyone who decides to start. In the pinned comment of this video and in the first link in the description, you'll find a method developed specifically for people who are tired of forgetting simple things. For those who have already been through the embarrassing situation of forgetting something important at the wrong moment. For those who feel their mind getting stuck more often than it should, it's a practical, accessible path. Click now and take a look. Because in the end, this isn't about accepting decline as inevitable. It's about understanding what is happening inside the brain and acting with awareness before the process advances beyond the point where recovery is still easy. And I say that with conviction because I lived through this process. I started adjusting small habits, nothing radical, nothing impossible. Things like respecting my sleep cycles more carefully, reducing digital stimulation before bed, including foods with anti-inflammatory properties, moving more, reserving genuine moments of mental silence throughout the day, and gradually something began to change. The mind became lighter, clearer, more present. That fog that once seemed permanent began to lift. Not all at once, not dramatically, but consistently in the same silent, progressive way it had arrived. Words started coming back more easily. Concentration began lasting longer. Memory stopped being a constant source of anxiety and became something I could trust again. Today, I see my mind in a completely different way. Not as something that is failing, but as a living system that responds directly to the choices I make every single day. A system that can be overloaded, but that can also be supported, nourished, and strengthened. And when you truly understand that, not just intellectually, but viscerally, everything changes. You stop living in insecurity about what you might forget tomorrow and start actively building clarity. You stop feeling lost inside your own mind and start having control over the direction your cognitive health is heading. And perhaps the most important thing of all, you realize there is still time, that the brain is resilient, that it responds, that changes, however small, have real and measurable impact when maintained with consistency. If this content made sense to you, if something here resonated with your own experience, with the signs you've been noticing, with the questions you've been carrying, then the next step is simple. Click the first link in the description, access the guide we prepared, and start understanding, in a concrete and practical way, how to support your brain the way it deserves. Because mental clarity isn't a luxury, it's the foundation of everything, of the decisions you make, of the conversations you have, of the memories you create, of the person you are capable of being at work, at home, in your relationships, for yourself. Subscribe to the channel as well, because in the upcoming videos I'll continue going deeper into these topics in a clear, practical way, grounded in what science actually shows about how to protect, stimulate, and recover your brain's full potential. You are not alone in this process, and the best time to start has always been right now.